Hey composer63, I made a video last night along with a couple other videos on these kind of topics that I uploaded for you, and but I don't know what happened to it. I thought it was uploading. Sometimes they fail, but anyway, who knows. So I'm going to make it again, and let me just say a couple things. One, okay, my thinking about a borderline personality disorder was confused really with personality disorder in general. I mean, you've been talking about various personality disorders. We've all heard about various ones. The narcissistic one, these are symptoms we see of people that we deal with. It's probably over, you know, diagnosed among people just arguing with each other, and yet there really are those kind of tendencies out there. So I was familiar with all that. But really, what's really struck me with the personality disorders, and so I just made a video reading through a Mayo Clinic outline of personality disorders in general. It's really all of those symptoms. And Mel's Basket case pointed out that the gang stalking doesn't look like borderline. You know, it's some other delusional thing. And indeed, not everything's a personality disorder. You have obsessive compulsiveness. There's a personality disorder associated with, you probably know this, but I'm just finding this out. But it's not the same as the anxiety thing that we all know is, you know, OCD. So there's obviously other problems, but the interesting thing about the personality disorder is pretty much all the symptoms. They're things we all feel, and a lot of them are even like appropriate to feel. I feel persecuted. Well, maybe you are being persecuted. So they're natural things, and it's really when they all get a hold of somebody in such a way that they're just not lucky enough to have the situation where it all can be coped with. You know, that can happen because of biochemistry or because you had a particularly bad childhood and things like this. I think these personality disorders are really a lot more common though, and I think really everybody has certain of these kinds of personality issues that are probably cost them in their life. But you know, maybe if it's not, you know, if they maybe just ruin one relationship. They don't talk to their brother anymore, and frankly they're like, well, because it was a bad relationship, it's just as well. So they don't have to face, like, they don't have to diagnose that big fight they had where they stopped talking to each other as borderline because it didn't affect their whole life, you know, or as not borderline, but as any, there I did it again, personality disorder, because it was just a focus in their life. They could see, well, that's just the way it happened to go because he pissed me off. They can interpret it otherwise. There's still this personality disorder in this little window that affected them. And even if they could live with the results, well, look at our society. Our society is having, you know, strange kind of inappropriate magical thinking things too. So it's really personality disorders. Okay, and the other thing I want to say is regarding your advice on the side of this, we have someone not specifically diagnosed, but he's been on meds and various, and just voices, and it's a real thing. We had a chance, I didn't, but someone I showed the video to had a chance to be with the person, and they tried this, some of the things you said. Now, one thing that's interesting is I'm really strong against don't be patronizing, and especially like in this case, right? You don't want to, like the whole distracting somebody, that's something you do with kids too, and it's not malevolent, but with an adult, it could be patronizing. And these are adults, and they're smart, so, and they already are on to people maybe patronizing them. But your advice wasn't really a patronistic advice. So like a friend of mine used the future thing, and when he'd be talking about issues, she was asking things about the future, and actually got to the point where he's like, you know, he was responding really positive and he wanted to talk. And at one point he's like, she's like, what are you going to be doing, blah, blah. He's like, well, December 2012, because all of these things, you know, and he thinks there's, and she's like, oh, well, what are you going to do December 22nd? He was like, he stopped and started thinking about it. And evidently he did ask her, why are you asking about the future so much? But it wasn't like a malevolent thing, because it also wasn't. It was really working for her. It was easing her tension, and she was hearing him say things she actually wasn't, you know, she was interested in. Hey, what are you going to do for your birthday? And, you know, it's no magic bullet, but geez, it can be so tense for people. Something like this is just wonderful, and you were so right. And I don't think it would have been clear to me, because sometimes with the distractions I would distract you. Oh, well, what was your favorite place as a kid? You know, and it's like, if somebody was just like a pessimist, then asking about the future wouldn't help. It shows how this stuff really works. And it's like, no, my future still has some of my freedom in it, my hope and my chances. So I really, really appreciate that advice. And yeah, other than that, I made another video to Mel where I read through and tried to inform myself more on personality disorders, because I think the thing that's really clicking with me is just sort of in general, just how widespread these kinds of symptoms. And some people might have a conditional reason, just what their condition was in, and that's how they got raised. I mean, I think in my case I struggle with things like that because of my childhood and the confusion of it, and certain emotions didn't mature at the same speed as other ones, and were more difficult to manage. And then of course some people have chemical things in their brain, and of course you can have both of those together. I've been thinking that that's probably a significant thing for those things to both be happening at once. Now, as far as a life thing, that's just hardship, but I want to say philosophically there's a little bit of a silver lining there, where most people are dealing with these kinds of issues with inhibition. There's just so much inhibition in this country. And I'm sure some of the things I've dealt with that were more rawly emotional is because I learned I didn't like inhibition. I would use it as a last resort for really important or embarrassing or just habitual behavior that you need to break. But basically, I don't believe in inhibitions. I believe that bottles up the energy and just comes out more strongly and more powerful later, and you have to process. So it's kind of interesting. Most people have a really hard time, Americans anyway, giving up grudges. They just forget about them and cut the people out of their life. And so there's a silver lining. If, Jesus, I have such a problem of holding grudges. I hold grudges against people I rationally can see I shouldn't. And then you learn how to get over it. The silver lining is all the people that just build the grudges up over their life and become bitter old people. My dad won't talk to me. He says I'm crazy. And it's grudges. Program grudges. And that's a really ironic one, because I never cost him anything. He was the one that kidnapped me and ran off with me when I was a kid and did all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So it's just how it goes. But it's sad when you get old and bitter, and that happens to a lot of people, and it's things like this. So it's hard to have to be forced to face that when you're young, and most people are just thinking of anything else. But on the other hand, that's what I did in my 20s. I had a confusing childhood, and I just sort of like, I've got to figure out all these hard emotions and why they're making me behave ways I don't want to behave. They're making me feel worried when I don't need to, and so on and so forth. So anyway, yeah, please, I know nothing about this stuff, but I want to be able to say what I think and be corrected. I'm very correctable. Might not be obvious to a lot of people watching my channels, because I talked a lot of epistemology and things where I have 30 years of evidence, and yeah, you have to have better evidence. But it's something like this where I'm just like, oh my God, I just realized I want to explore. I'm not totally uninformed in all the pieces, but I just realized, hey, I want to explore this spectrum. I want to look at this in a new way. So I'm going to say things, and if I make a fool, I'd rather say how I feel and have people go, well, those are silly, because I can go, oh yeah, that is silly, thanks for showing me that. Or I could just bury it and hide it and go, well, I won't share this because maybe it makes me look stupid. And then I'll just have that idea 20, 30 years instead of getting rid of it like right now. So anyway, so I appreciate all the speculation, that they tolerated the speculation, because yeah, like the dictators, I could see how that's kind of ludicrous to think that there's anything borderline about that diagnosably, because if you're expressing these kinds of symptoms and anxieties as borderline, yeah, you're not going to that's a cutoff thing. But there's still narcissism and a lot of other personality disorders. We see CEOs and people, I just see a lot of those kind of symptoms out there in people that are supposedly not diagnosable. And also sort of the subtle thing is, out there in a group of people, none of which you'd want to diagnose, or maybe just hypothetically you wouldn't, and yet as a group they do things that seem diagnosable if they all were one individuals, like bad individuals. So again, not borderline, but I mean personality disorders in general. And so anyway, thanks very much. On the practical side of real life, you really that was a very helpful way to think about engagement. and I appreciate that a lot.